This is Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich with the Sheriff's Report. You know, we have a very important political races coming up, and one of those being the office of sheriff. And I thought it'd be interesting to bring all three candidates in, have them sit down, discuss their platforms, their work experience, and the things that are being set out on the campaign trail. Only one of the three decided to take me up on that. The other two said, well, since you've already endorsed somebody, it might be a biased interview. Here's the harsh reality for those two candidates. You're going to have to face those type of situations if you become sheriff. Are you going to run from them then, as you're running from them now, would be the question in my mind if I have to choose who's going to be the next sheriff. You don't always get to pick the environment where you have to answer questions. I've been there. I have had to attend many a panel discussion in which the people on the other side of the panel were extremely biased in their opinions and more to the tone of attacking the positions of anybody else on the panel. So just something to think about, folks. The people that you elect have to be willing to come and answer questions, regardless if they think it's going to be biased, or if it's going to be hostile, or if it's going to be a very hard interview. You have to be willing to do that. If you're not, you probably should never run for office, and definitely you should never run to be a sheriff, because a sheriff, you end up answering very difficult questions all the time. So the candidate that did show up was candidate for sheriff, John Nowels. And John, as I stated, we're going to break the interview up into three different sections. I want people to understand platform. I chose platform first because it's easy to have campaign rhetoric. It's easy to say, we need a change. Well, okay, what does that mean? I believe a good friend of ours likes to say, changes in the strategic plan.
Correct.
What is, the platform should be more importantly, okay, what are you going to change? How are you going to change it? How much is that change going to cost? Can we actually pull that change off? Those are all the things that when you start asking for details, so far I have not seen your two opponents be able to talk about the detail of their platform other than, the sheriff's office is a mess and we need a change. So John, in 10 minutes, what's your platform? What are you really running on and what do you plan to do?
So I've stated this many, many times. We both know, and Sheriff, you clearly, uniquely know that the challenges you face are not necessarily born of necessarily the operations inside the sheriff's office. So I full well recognize that the things that I do as the sheriff, the programs we implement, the programs we support, we can have only so much effect internally with the sheriff's office. So part of the plan is also building relationships outside the sheriff's office. That is the sheriff's responsibility because the sheriff has so much influence, and building relationships and working with outside entities to solve community-wide problems that are not just public safety centric. So we'll talk about that a little bit in a few minutes. But we know that we're dealing with a violent crime issue in Spokane. We know that we have had a perpetual property crime issue in Spokane. And you will see my opponents say, well, the administration hasn't been able to get a handle on that now, so we need change so we can deal with it later. But what another of my opponents talk about is what plans they have to address those issues. Well, and I can say for the last 10 years and even longer, we have been addressing these issues with the tools that we have in the sheriff's office. We've been very good about developing burglary task forces. When property crimes were spiking, we put together task forces that were very effective, holding people accountable. We got the prosecutor's office on board, and we got the attention of our judiciary long enough that they were holding these people accountable. And we knocked down those crime rates. We made sure that property crimes were kept under control. And then somebody changes a policy, somebody does something at the state level that has a significant impact on crime. We keep doing things the same way, right? We keep implementing programs like burglary task forces, violent crime task forces. We are fantastic at doing, large investigations. Our patrol people are great at going out, finding people who are committing criminal acts, holding them accountable, and they do a really good job of that. We have developed intelligence-led policing strategies that are on the cutting edge of crime prevention and crime identification, denying, disrupting, and dismantling criminal organizations. We're at the leading edge of that.
You mentioned something. The rules change.
All the time.
All the time. Recently, 2020, 2021, the rules changed.
Right. You're stealing my
21
thunder, Sheriff.
Yes. Yeah, the rules changed big time with our state legislature in 21. The one thing that I have yet to hear your opponents address, and I'm going to ask you this very pointed question: what are you going to do to affect and respond to the changes handed down to law enforcement across this state from the state legislature, because they really severely have hampered the ability of law enforcement to respond to some of these things? These are things that you and I are currently working on. However, this isn't about me. This is, what is John Nowels going to do to help our community and our deputies deal with that change and still keep the citizens safe? What's your plan?
So there's a multifaceted approach to this, because we know that we've got to address these changes inside our agency, and that we know that it's the sheriff's responsibility to develop relationships and use the bully pulpit to influence the people who are setting policy in the state. Sheriff, it's easy for me here as a new candidate to sit here and say, you know what? It's about developing relationships, and I have developed relationships across the aisle. I've developed relationships with policymakers at the state level and at the county and city level. They're important because those are the people who are legislating some of these changes, and a lot of them are done very, very poorly. And I know, Sheriff, after 16 years, I may end up taking a different approach, an approach similar to where you are, where you've become so frustrated with the lack of people listening to what's driving these crime rates and the lack of them understanding how what they're doing is affecting what's happening on the street, that it gets really, really hard to be nice about it, right? And to take the approach of, hey, I really need you to work with me. But so far, I have, the endorsement of Andy Billig. Andy Billig is responsible at a great level to the public safety in this community. Sometimes he might not be comfortable with that idea, but the policies that they're setting through legislation are having significant impacts on our communities. So I have to have a relationship with Andy Billig and every legislator to say, let me come in and sit down and talk to you about the significant impacts of some of these things. They wiped out, the Supreme Court of Washington State wiped out our controlled substance law, and the legislature in 2021 really put in an ineffective controlled substance law that has had a huge impact on our violent crime rate in Spokane. I have to talk to my men and women, train them about, hey, this is what the law is. I have the unique experience of all three candidates. I've worked in the narcotics area, in the narcotics arena, for the last 15 years of my career. I understand intimately all the ins and outs of what it takes to put together a narcotics trafficking case, and all the things that we have to do to build effective case and hold cartel level drug dealers accountable. Neither of my opponents understand that. I was in a debate where one of the opponents, Mr. Nelson, said, yes, we did have our possession of controlled substance law taken away, but we still have manufacturing and we still have, delivery charges. Well, that's true, but he's never worked a drug investigation to the level up to a cartel level. He doesn't understand that the genesis of all of those cases come from possession of controlled substance cases. That's where we get our intel. That's where we get the leverage to get people to turn on those who are actually selling these drugs in the street. None of my opponents have worked in that arena long enough to understand the nuances of what it takes, let alone the challenges in technology that we have now, where people are no longer using phones and text messages to do drug investigations. They're using social media platforms and the complications that come with that. The entire landscape has changed.
Technology.
Yes.
One of your opponents has made the statement that the sheriff's office has failed to keep up with the technology and our ability to track and monitor these individuals on online services and things like that. What's your response to that? I mean, because this is your arena. You are in charge of our intelligence arm, our investigative arm. You, for a great part of what we're doing, have been creating and responding to these things and hiring people that truly understand how to do this stuff. What's your answer to that? When you hear one of your opponents say that, you being the guy, you are the guy in charge of that, how do you respond to that?
Nothing could be further from the truth. What we are doing in our regional intelligence group is at the cutting edge of technology. That's just the truth of it. We have the program that I'm very proud of it myself, right? There's a lot of facets to the regional intelligence group, but what I'm particularly proud of is I recognized very early on in my tenure in the investigative and intelligence division that technology was rapidly evolving, and we'd get detectives in and they'd have to learn how to do cell phone analysis, how to write search warrants for cell phone data. And then as time went on, social media data, and there's a lot of nuances and a lot of technical data. And we'd send our detectives to this training, which isn't cheap, $10,000 to send them to a week class. They'd get a little bit of experience, never really developing expertise, and then they'd promote and leave, and I'd have to send somebody else to that training. And we never developed the expertise necessary. Then I ran into Mark Voigtlander, who's one of our analysts. He was a National Guard analyst who has a tremendous amount of experience in running counterterrorism operations, and he was an analyst with the National Guard. And the National Guard was pulling out of our regional drug task force effort. And I said, Mark, I would love to hire you as an analyst for the sheriff's office and be an investigative analyst, somebody who can, because he already had the expertise on how to do all of these things. And I want to bring you in and have you be a plug and play for all of our investigative units. Well, we did it. And now we have replicated that. And we have now, I think, 7, investigative analysts now, that they are the finest investigative analysts in the state, maybe even in the country, frankly. And they use their expertise to support our investigators. And our investigators quickly learned that they didn't have to become experts in all of these things. These men and women can write search warrants to get the data that these investigators need. These investigators get a great intelligence package that they would have had to have spent days doing, and now it's handed to them by these investigative analysts. It's been a force multiplier, but they're experts in technology. We're starting to, we're actually putting together a plan right now with the Spokane County Commissioners, requesting almost $3 million in ARP funds to build our technology out on the street. We're going to build a real-time crime center. What does that mean? We're going to actually put license plate readers, cameras in public places, in our parks, on the trail, out in the valley, in places where people need to feel secure and we need to have better surveillance. They're going to be overt cameras that are visible. They're going to have blue lights on the top of them, but more importantly, they're going to be recording, and we are all going to have access to them real time. That is a technology leap that we have needed for a long time, and we're going to implement it in the next year. It's going to allow our officers to get to calls with more accurate intelligence sooner. It's going to save us money because deputies, instead of having to drive to each individual park to see if there's suspicious activity, they're going to be able to pull up a live camera feed of all those cameras in their vehicle. And they're going to be able to say, listen, I don't have to drive all over because I see the suspicious car at this park. I'm going to go there. And more importantly, we're going to be able to have analysts dedicated to watching those video feeds real time to get people there as well. That's technology.
That is technology. And I couldn't believe it when I read the statement by one of your opponents on that. I went, you have no clue. You worked in this agency and you have no clue as to what this agency's capabilities are. And that could be because he's never been a leader. He's never been in a position like that, and Mr. Nelson would have never been put in those positions. He just didn't have what it took. Another thing that I've heard on the campaign trail is Mr. Zollers wants to do away with the air unit. And I found that a little interesting because Mike was one of the bigger proponents of the air unit when he was in SWAT, and he wanted the air units to have sniper capability, and he wanted the air units to have medics on board. And now to hear this is one of his big changes that he wants to make. What say do you? I mean, you want to get rid of the air unit also?
No, and I think historically, I think there has been some question about the necessity of the air unit.
John, when I first became sheriff, I was one of those that questioned the necessity of that air unit. Why? There was no plan. There was no budget. There was nothing. And it was like, okay, what do we do with this?
Yeah. So here's some data for people to understand. For the air unit that we have today, we have done it on a shoestring budget. Kudos to Chief Ellis and all the men and women who have worked in the air support unit. They have done it on a shoestring budget. Has it been free? No, it hasn't been free. And I think people don't really quite understand what a force multiplier those helicopters can be. But particularly since we've lost our ability to pursue people, I have been advocating in command staff meetings that maybe some of the funds that we have been given to offset some of these legislative reforms should be used to increase our fuel budget for the helicopters, because those are our most effective tool to keep surveillance on vehicles that we can no longer pursue. We should be increasing the budget now because of the legislation. We shouldn't be getting rid of it. We shouldn't be questioning it. The budget is about $250,000 to $260,000, somewhere in that range a year for operations. Yes, we do have one-time equipment changes that we need to bring in, but those are done in the most fiscally conservative way possible. I mean, we go out and try to find equipment really inexpensively. Chief Ellis has been a wizard in how to get that equipment at bargain basement prices. We get helicopters for free. The maintenance isn't free, but the helicopters are free. And now we've got a program where we're going to be able to start selling some of those helicopters now to bring in helicopters that we own that are newer and going to be far more affordable to operate. I mean, when people just look at what's being spent, they question it. But the fact of the matter is now we need the capabilities of helicopters, and they're more needed than ever now. And this budget that we have used to deploy these helicopters has been minimal. People come and ask us how we do it. They try to replicate the way we have financed this program.
Budgets. Neither of your opponents have college education.
Correct.
Maybe most an associate's degree. The sheriff's office is a $57 million operation, just shy of 57 million, 56,995,000, and I can go on.
Right.
It takes skill to operate and manage that budget, or any budget within the sheriff's office. What's your background? Because, ladies and gentlemen, I will tell you that budgeting and understanding your budget and keeping your budget under control is one of the most important things the sheriff does. He has to be very integrated into that budget. John can tell you that I can almost quote the amount of budgets that we have left in certain categories and everything else. And here's why. It's if you're running for this office, you need to understand this. You're personally liable for that budget. That means if you blow that budget, that comes out of your own pocket. You are fiscally, personally responsible for your budget. And we've always run a very tight budget because I run my budget like I run my household account. And I'm very tight with the way we spend our money. John, now you want to be the sheriff. What's your background in dealing with a $57 million budget? How are you going to manage that?
Well, as you're well aware, when you appointed me as undersheriff, I took over the role of the undersheriff in the administrative division, which was responsible for the budget. So I had to take a look at all of those things you just articulated. I was responsible for that. I was the undersheriff that had to report to you. So the entire time that I've been in a leadership position, you first start running into being responsible for the budget in the sheriff's office at the lieutenant level, where you really, or at least you should run into that. Not all of our lieutenants have been very responsible with their budgets, but I took my responsibility as a lieutenant in the investigative support unit, which is all the drug accounts, all of the doofies, all the high liability areas very, very seriously. And I was trained to watch my budget, to plan effectively. And I did. And that is a skill and a responsibility I have passed on to every lieutenant that works for me. My lieutenants who work for me in the investigative division and the intelligence division know I expect them to run their budgets. We plan, we execute. We don't deviate without good reason, and we always make sure we stay within the parameters of our budget. That's an expectation I have, and it's an expectation I had as the administrative undersheriff. And it was really interesting to walk into some of our patrol lieutenants and lieutenants of our specialty areas and say, I expect you to come in and tell me how you're going to stay within budget, because as you well know, with better planning on our part, the last 5 years, and with a county commission that was maybe more traditionally supportive of the sheriff's office financially than we'd seen in the past, we were actually able to start working towards getting a budget that actually reflected our ongoing costs. We're working on that every year, and we're finally getting there, right? And I was in there in the first couple of years where they actually got us to the point where we were very close to being funded at what we actually were incurring costs for. And that's huge in itself. And the relationships I had to build with the people in the budget office, with the county, right? People have to understand the sheriff's office, we are given the budget. We can request whatever we want, but we're given a budget, and we have to go over and build relationships with county commissioners, with county leaders, the budget director for the county, and make sure that we get enough of what we need. And I was very successful in that in my first year doing that. Was it perfect? No. We had some assumptions that were going on inside our own department that really kind of hurt us, because one of the first things I told our lieutenants when we got our budget in, I think it was 2019, was, listen, they gave us our operating budget, and I think we can shave 10% off of our overtime bill. Well, I found out that our assumptions on some of that were not accurate, and they had used some of the underspend for underfunded positions in their estimation of covering our overtime. So we didn't end up with a real number. But that's how serious we take the budget is, listen, if we're funded correctly, it's very easy to manage the budget if you have the experience and know how everything is attached. But I've worked in the budget for years, and it's something that I've always held people accountable to.
Last phase, last 10 minutes. Your work experience with the sheriff's office. Deputy on up, you've tried to make incremental changes in almost every place that you've ever been. That's one of the really criteria when we look at promoting people. What have you really done? What have you done for the agency? What's your capabilities? And, John, talk a little bit about that stair step, because each and every one of those positions is a building block. It's a building block in who you are and how you become a leader within the agency. So give me a little bit of time, and then there's a question that, I've got to ask you, because it's always being asked out on the campaign trail. So we'll finish with that, and then I'll give you 2 minutes to, why you.
Okay. So, again, I have worked in patrol. I worked in patrol from 1998 and traffic is still in patrol, but I went to the traffic unit in 2003, became a technical collision investigator. I worked on fatality collisions for the next 3 years. And when I promoted to detective, I worked in property crimes, the way we used to work property crimes, and I'll get to how I changed that here in a little bit. And then I was fortunate enough I spent a little bit of time back as a patrol corporal, as a patrol supervisor. And then I was fortunate enough to get selected to go work in our undercover narcotics unit, the investigative support unit. And that was the first time I really got exposed to being on a fantastic team of people who really cared and supported each other and really wanted to make sure that everybody down there was doing great work. It was the kind of group where you could go in, you could do something. And this is incredibly complicated work. It's incredibly risk centric work where you have to care about the guy and the girl to your left and your right, because you're in some dangerous situations when you're in. I did undercover drug buys. And I had to trust that those people had my back out there because I had a wife and kids at home. And I'm buying drugs from somebody who's got semi-automatic and fully automatic guns hidden in the closet next to me. I didn't know it at the time, but when we served the search warrant the day later, they did. So you had to trust those people, but you also had to take feedback from those people. And when they told you that you screwed something up, you knew that they weren't saying it because they didn't like you. They wanted you to get better, and we're all to get better. And those are the kinds of teams I have tried to build everywhere I have been since then. This will be something that's not really well known to most of the public, but you and I, Ozzie, we didn't always see eye to eye, and you didn't always think I was the best supervisor. You didn't think I was the best candidate to be supervisor. When I tested for sergeant as ISU, you passed me over.
I did. I passed you over. I chose another individual. You were next in line, and at that point, we promoted you. And
but I think
you showed.
But
your worth.
here's what I want people to know about that is I was angry at you. I was angry at you for a while, but I made a decision after I walked out of that office that day and after I got promoted 6 months later, and I knew that if I was going to prove myself to you and to the agency, that I was going to have to be the best sergeant there was. So I went about my business by making sure that every unit I went into, I developed meaningful standards, meaningful performance measures, and then I held people accountable to them. I did that on the patrol level, frankly, following a sergeant who didn't do that. In the investigative division, I took the experience and the skills I had working narcotics cases and said, we need to change the way we are going after property crimes offenders, because we know that 90% of our property crimes are being committed by 20% of the people. So I took that model and I said, we are going to change the way we go about it. I changed the things we counted. I made sure we did search warrants. We wanted to get into people's houses. I did the same thing at the lieutenant level. Held people accountable, but gave them meaningful standards, gave them the training they needed. When it came time to be a lieutenant and I interviewed with you, you were ready to pass over the person you had passed me over for to promote me to lieutenant. You knew that I was the best candidate there. And I bet you 12 years ago, Ozzie, if you thought that you'd be endorsing me to replace you as sheriff, you would have told somebody you were crazy. But I've proven myself to you over and over and over again. You have not given anything to me. You have not gifted it. If anything, you have pushed me harder because I think you knew what it was going to take to replace you.
And you bring up a very interesting, valid point. I passed you over not because I didn't believe in you. I passed you over in that I thought you still needed some growth. And you and I had that hard discussion. Way back when. We had that hard discussion because you asked why. And I said, John, here are the gaps I see. And from that day on, you went about filling those gaps. 6 years ago, you came to me and went, you're going to be retiring in probably 4 to 6 years. What do I need to do to become the next sheriff? And I gave you a task list. I said, here are the things that you need to accomplish. Here are some of the gaps that I see on your road to that goal. And ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you, this man listened. He went and got his master's degree. He went to the National Academy. And folks, in today's world, if you want to be a law enforcement executive at chief or sheriff level, those are the two major benchmarks. It used to be bachelor's. It's really master's degree. It's the NA. It's experience actually in the seat doing the job for preferably 5 years. Many are looking more at the 10-year mark. There's only one candidate in this race that fills that bill. And John, I have to take my hat off to you because you asked, what does it take? And the list I gave you was not an easy list to accomplish.
No.
And you're right. You and I haven't always seen eye to eye. We still don't always see eye to eye.
And we shouldn't.
And we shouldn't. But when it comes down to it, people ask why I endorsed. Well, there's only one candidate that actually checked all the boxes.
Right.
So I have to ask you, you get asked all the time. It's not one of your favorite topics. Discipline. I had to issue some discipline to you.
Yep.
Because of a comment. And I will tell the people out there, most of the time when you issue discipline, there's always the excuse factory starts. And people don't like to take the responsibility for their actions. John, when it came to my attention of what had happened in your situation, you're one of the few employees that went, yeah, that happened.
Actually, I was the one who told you.
Yeah, you brought it to me and said, this is what's happened. And we dealt with it. But it, as politics be, you have to live with that now.
Yes.
So what can you tell us about that?
So the situation, if the viewers don't know, is we had an employee who had been off for quite a bit of time because of an issue. And out of frustration, it was an issue where his ex-wife had accused this deputy of something that he had not done. It was a false allegation, and it was impacting his work life. And I was calling to check on that, talking with a support staff person who I had worked with and known for years, thought I had a good personal relationship with. And I made the offhand statement out of frustration, and it was hyperbole, was all ex-wives should die or be killed, something to that effect. Again, hyperbole, said out of frustration. When that individual said, "Oh, John," I said, "Well, you know I didn't mean that." And that employee said, "Yeah, you're right, I know." And even in the investigation, that employee said, "Yes, I was not offended by what John said, and I knew John didn't mean it literally." But it came to my attention that that statement was going to be used to justify a statement another deputy had used, somewhere else. And I knew that couldn't stand. There's no way anything that came out of my mouth should be used to justify what came out of that other deputy's mouth. So again, I reported it, wrote a 4.5, 5-page paper, I think, basically saying this is the situation as I recall it. This is what I did. Handed it to the internal affairs sergeant at the time, who then gave it to you. Owned it from the start. Received a pretty significant discipline. It was tough to, it was tough to take. It cost me, about $13,000 worth of time. But I think this is the important part that everybody needs to know. I understand that as a leader in the sheriff's office, and this is articulated in my report, where I reported myself for this, I understood that what I said didn't represent the values of the sheriff's office. It didn't represent something that should come out of an executive's mouth. Own it. Moved on. Took my punishment. Have moved on. What does that mean about me? Now as the sheriff, when I have to meter out discipline, I can have empathy for the person I'm sitting across from and say, listen, you made a mistake. You've owned it. This is what the disciplinary action is going to be. It might not be comfortable today, and you might be embarrassed. It's very embarrassing to talk about this disciplinary action for me today, it's still embarrassing because it's not indicative of the character I have, right? But I think it's indicative, how I've responded and what I will use this for in the future is indicative of my character. I can now sit across from that employee and say, okay, it's over. Let's move on. Let's get better. You'll survive. I've survived. You will be fine, right? Unless it's such an egregious act that it's something we can't move on from. But you know what? They'll be fine and they can move on outside the sheriff's office. I've had to deliver those conversations to friends of mine in the past. That's hard.
Yeah, discipline is one of the hardest things that a sheriff has to deal with. It truly is. The sad part is they always ask you about that, but they never talk to your opponents about any of the things that they've been chastised for. And I find that very lacking. It's really odd being on this side of an election, just watching it play out. Because I remember what the media was like during my first elections and in subsequent elections. It was brutal. It was extremely brutal. They actually fed into allegations that were thrown out. But I've not seen that in your race, and I've definitely not seen them ask anything about the backgrounds of the two people running against you. And our media is really, I don't know what's happened to it. They seem very biased right now in the way they approach things from your very first opponent on. So, folks, you might want to start asking questions. Ask the tough questions. This was not comfortable for you. I know it wasn't comfortable for you, but we all make mistakes in life. Lord knows, I've made my share of mistakes in life. And it's what you do with that mistake that defines the person. Yeah. The last 2 minutes, John. Why you? Why? I just got my ballots, all right? Why you? Why am I checking your name?
First and foremost, character. You just described in the last 2 minutes my character. I have no problem owning my mistakes, feeling that embarrassment, but then continuing to go out and do the right things for the right reasons. You do not hear me leveling baseless allegations against anybody or against anything this department has done. The truth of the matter is our department is excellent. The morale is good. No morale is ever perfect. I have a plan to take this sheriff's office to the next level. I have the experience to do it. I've said many times in debates now, there is no resume requirement for running for sheriff in Spokane County. You just have to pay $1,700. The public needs to know that for any police executive job, and you alluded to it earlier, is there is a minimum list of standards, and then there's a preferred list of standards. Everything from bachelor's degree is a minimum. For a department that is a chief of police for 3 people, it's required that you have a college degree, 4-year degree. Preferred is a master's degree. You have to have progressive experience in progressive leadership roles. Up to 7 to 10 years these days is preferred. Minimum is 5. And they say at the rank of captain or above. And that's different from every agency. They also expect you to have a national, an FBI National Academy experience or equivalent as a minimum standard. They also want you to have demonstrated community-oriented policing experience, demonstrated ties to the community. I worked for the Community-Oriented Policing Service office, the COPS office. I volunteered to work a second job last year to gain that experience and work on these national level policy levels. That's how I've come up with the idea of this community resource deputy program that my opponents, frankly, can't even fathom the intricacies and the benefit of implementing that program. I check all the boxes for a police executive in this country. I get an interview for almost any job. My opponents will not get an interview with their resume, and the citizens of Spokane County deserve an executive who has taken the time and has had the character to say 6 years ago, I think I want to prepare myself to do this, and then did the work, put in the time. There was no shortcuts here. I didn't sit back as a lieutenant and then decide at the last minute that I was going to do this, or sit back as a detective and then just decide, hey, I'm going to run this and I'm going to somehow step into these roles and understand how to do it. I put in the work to gain the knowledge and the expertise to be able to run this agency, but more importantly, to go out and serve the community the way they deserve to be served. That takes all of that experience to understand that the role of the sheriff is to be accountable directly to the people, and then how to implement policies that directly serve that purpose. My opponents don't have that experience, and they did not take the time to develop it. That's how serious of a sheriff's candidate they are. They didn't do anything to prepare themselves for the last 6 years, last 2 years, last year. Both of them left the agency.
Very, very well said. That's basically what I look at when I promote people. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a misconception out there that I only promote people I like. And that's not true. I promote some people that really can't stand me. Why? Because I see something in them. I see that they have abilities, or they have proven abilities. And I've made a commitment to the agency and to myself, actually, that I would never allow politics to hurt anybody else's job progressions. John made it very clear, and I'm making it very clear to you. We've not always seen eye to eye. We've not always liked each other. But John showed something that I need to promote him up the ranks, and I actually took him into my command staff as an undersheriff, not because we have dinners or anything else together.
No.
It's because I know he can do the job, he can serve this community, and I need people that can serve the community. I don't need bobbleheads. I don't need somebody telling me everything's bright and shiny all day. I truly need the people who are willing to go, I think we're heading in the wrong path. We need to do a course adjustment. That's the leadership team that has been brought to the sheriff's office, and that is the leadership team that I know will continue. Folks, this is Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich. You have a very important decision to make. Get past the rhetoric, ask the hard questions, and vote. The most important thing you do is vote in a primary. The general is the cakewalk for a candidate. The primary is where the difference between good and bad leadership is chosen. We have to choose good people, and it happens in the primary. This is Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich with the Sheriff's Report. Have a good day.